Yes. We're coming in.
Sorry about that.
No. I didn't know whether to bring you in at 11 when we had scheduled, but I didn't want to make you wait and wait and wait.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, no, please. And welcome, Brian Scott Lipton, to the neighborhood.
Thank you, Dave.
Here's the deal. First of all, we'll do the category. That's the main thing. We have all our critics coming on talking about the different categories nominated for Tony Awards this season. So you picked a big one, Revival of a Musical. And the category, the nominees are Cabaret at the Kit Kat Club, Gutenberg, The Musical, Merrily We Roll Along, The Who's Tommy, Brian Scott Lipton. Your thoughts?
Well, it's certainly an interesting category, but I don't think this is much of a race. As you might know, and I know didn't come up in the intro, I do a lot of Tony predictions for goldderby.com. I'm sort of the reigning champ most of the time. And we get to do these, of all the categories, there are two you can do as what they call sure bets, which are worth 500 points. I don't really understand the point system, but this category is my sure bet. And it's for Merrily We Roll Along. It's a twofold thing. I mean, first of all, the other three nominees that you mentioned, The Wiz, Gutenberg, are both entertaining, but they're really pretty slight. They're not really in that great Tony Best of category. Cabaret is this very provocative reimagining of this musical that, of course, has been revived twice before, three times before on Broadway. It's been a real kind of love it or hate it experience, at least in the critical community. And I think even with viewers, non-critic people I've talked to, some people found it fascinating. Some people just found it almost unwatchable. But
Brian, let me ask you, how did you feel about this quote unquote controversial reimagining of Cabaret?
Not great. I didn't really understand. It's a British production from a director named Rebecca Frecknell. And I don't really understand what her concept was, what she was trying to show us in her new version. I think Eddie Redmayne is an extraordinarily talented actor, but I don't understand his perception of the MC. It's very different than Joel Grey's or Alan Cummings. It's very cold. And Gail Rankin, who I also think is very talented, is playing Sally Bowles as sort of somewhere between hysterical and overly egotistical. There's not enough vulnerability there. So I didn't think it was great. Merrily, on the other hand, which I was blessed to see 4 times, twice off Broadway and twice on Broadway, is really nothing short of perfection. And nobody is more shocked at saying that than me, because although I did not see the original quote unquote flop 1981 production, I've seen about 4 revivals afterwards. And this show has never worked, despite it being one of Stephen Sondheim's best scores and most memorable. But it's booked by George Firth, based on a play by Kaufman and Hart, which goes backwards chronologically. And therefore, when you first meet our 3 main characters, they're in their 40s. They're horrible, bitter, really despicable people. And in every other production, you hate them so much from the opening scene or scenes that you never care really to sit through the next 2.5 hours and find out how they got there from here and see how they were really optimistic, smart young people. And the genius of Maria Friedman's production, and of course the casting of Jonathan Groff, Daniel Radcliffe, and Lindsay Mendez, without whom this would be a very different production, I suspect, changes all that. You almost see instantly, yes, they're still pretty horrible people at the beginning. You're still not going to like them for the first 15 minutes, but you get a sense of their vulnerability. You almost get the sense, without knowing the story, of how they became or why they're so unhappy, even though they're all successful in their own ways. And then certainly as they go backwards, it becomes more and more clear how they all got to where they were from there and lost their optimism and really lost their way, and how they're really just human beings. They are flawed human beings, like all of us are. And they give in to jealousy and greed and unrequited love and ambition and all those things that in some, maybe not to the stakes that the characters have, but that we've all felt through.
Now, let
Um,
me ask you, we're talking with Brian Scott Lipton about revival of a musical, and we talked a bit about the nominees. Do you feel any feeling about two that were left out, that could have been considered, like The Wiz and Spamalot? Should
no,
they?
The Wiz made it.
Oh, wait, I'm sorry. The Wiz is up there. I'm sorry for revival of a musical.
I believe
Oh,
it is.
I accidentally left that off my list. Oops, that's my second.
I
Uh-oh,
I
second
think they
mistake of
are.
the day.
I think they are.
Um,
Um,
I
I
think
really enjoyed Spamalot. I'm sorry that it didn't make the cut. Um I thought it was actually, to me, more fun than the original in a way.
really.
Um, which I think also had something to do with expectation. First time around, closer to the release of the movies, I think we had a greater expectation for what we were getting. This one I think took itself maybe even a little less seriously, which I appreciated. It was a little more bare bones. It came from the Kennedy Center. I will not say it was lavish. I mean, it was lavish in terms of talent. Amazing people. Michael Urie, James Monroe Iglehart, Taron Killam, and especially Leslie Rodriguez Kritzer. But it wasn't great in terms of scenery or costumes. It was fine. And I don't know whether or not that hurt its commercial chances, but I think it really should have been up there.
And what about The Wiz? People can feel kind of meh about it. It's doing, I guess, pretty well at the box office.
It's
But
been doing very well in the box office, which proves that there is definitely an audience for the show, which is really well steeped in nostalgia, both for The Wiz and The Wizard of Oz, and which is the rare kind of true family friendly entertainment you get on Broadway. And it's wonderful to hear about people bringing their children when they saw it the first time. I mean, I was about 15 when I saw it the first time. I have no children to bring it to, but it is a great exercise in nostalgia. It's part of a national tour, and I don't think it fit all that well on Broadway. I wish it had sort of been reimagined for the Broadway stage. It seemed a little. I
provincial.
I had to say it. It seemed a little cheap. The sets, the costumes. I mean, they were there, but they didn't quite seem to fit the lavishness of the material. Um, but the cast is very talented. And so, I certainly understand why people had a good time. I certainly also understand why the Tony nominating committee may not have felt it was up there in its top group
Let
of
me
people.
ask you, Brian Scott Lipton, speaking of things that are up there, what are your two or three favorite shows on or off Broadway, play or musical, of the whole, besides Merrily, of the whole season?
Okay. Before I answer that,
Oh, sure.
um, what I really want to talk about this season, I'm certainly happy to answer that,
Yeah.
um, is my great admiration and praise for maybe not all, but mostly all of the Broadway actresses we got to see this year. This has been the most extraordinary year for women, play or musical, that I can recall. And in any season that we have been treated to, in no particular order, Sarah Paulson, Jessica Lange, Malaya Joy Moon, Phoebe Newworth, Keisha Lewis, Cara Young, Sarah Pigeon. I could go on, but I have really never seen a season. Leslie Rodriguez Fritzer. I have never seen a season this rich in female performances. And if they're not getting these people the opportunities in Hollywood or TV that they deserve, or if it's just a question of loving the stage, I am personally so grateful they are all sharing their talents with us on Broadway.
Oh,
Um,
yeah. Well,
we
that
could have,
may, that's sort of almost a theme here because we had
yes,
Leslie Hoban Blake talking about all these female directors.
yes, we have some great,
And then we had Carrie Purcell who wrote a book about feminist theater, kind of raving about this idea of it's a good year for.
yes, we've had wonderful women creators. Shayna Taub, obviously for Tufts, Alicia Keys writing the score of Hell's Kitchen. I know it is basically a jukebox musical, but that would not be on Broadway without Alicia Keys. Lila Bauer, who directed Appropriate, We can go on. It is really the year of the woman on Broadway, and that is to be celebrated. And
Right.
leading back to your question,
And what shows
uh,
are you celebrating from the past season
uh,
personally? Right? Yeah.
well, okay, on the musical front, I would say my two favorites were truly Hell's Kitchen. Even though it is quote unquote a jukebox musical, and I am not intensely familiar with the work of Alicia Keys, but there is so much joy and love and craft on that stage. Um, yes, the story is a little slight, but it's so beautifully sung, beautifully told. Speaking of women, gorgeously choreographed by Camille Brown. Um, that it really made me happy in a way that nothing else really did this season.
Wow.
Um,
Yeah.
in terms also of musicals, I mean, total kudos to The Outsiders, a show I went in with honestly no expectation. I am not of the generation where that book meant really anything toward me, and I barely remember the movie. And it was really, it's sort of an old story. It's kind of just a variation almost on West Side Story, but the people behind this, especially the Coopermans, the brothers who choreographed it, and Dana Tamor, another woman who directed it, and Jamestown Revival, who wrote the score, made it feel fresh and totally, um, totally new and sort of worth seeing. And thirdly, I guess on the musical front, a big shout out to Illinois. I don't know that I truly believe it's a Broadway musical. It is a modern dance piece that I think works brilliantly in that context. Just because you stuck it in the St. James, I'm not sure I'm willing to call it a Broadway musical, but bravo to Justin Peck. It's amazing choreographer and director and his cast
But
who
hey, just it was maybe 10 already, 20 years ago when Matthew Byrne was bringing his
right.
ballets and his things to Broadway. They were technically Broadway musicals, in a manner of speaking.
Right. I
Yeah.
mean, here we have a story by Jackie Dribble Suri, and again, another woman. Um, we don't have any dialogue, but it's a very moving experience,
Oh,
and I
cool.
think it's certainly worth viewing, even if you're not a quote unquote dance aficionado. And on the play front, um, I know you may be expecting me to say stereophonic, but that's not actually happening. Um,
Oh.
but the one play I will really give a shout out to is Appropriate, which was also a way in a shock. I saw in review the original signature production in 2013. I did not reread my review till after I saw this production the first time, and it turns out I didn't like it the first time, um, and I was so curious about what changed. Part of what changed is Brandon Jacobs Jenkins did rewrite his book, and I believe that strengthened his story. Again, Lila Neugebauer did a beautiful job in directing. I can't say enough good things about Sarah Paulson. How she does this particular performance 8 times a week is truly stupefying to me. If you haven't seen it, she plays a very unhappy, very angry woman having to deal with her admittedly dysfunctional family, and the level of passion and anger and sadness that she brings to a stage in full blast 8 times a week is just an acting lesson. It's a master class.
Wow.
Um, and I
Cool.
saw it twice. I went back during the recent time being a Tony voter just to reinforce what I thought about it. And wow. And I
And
would
you're
say
not the only person who's
I would
bringing
say, I mean,
this.
I'm, the Tony rules, as you know, David, are a little flaky at times, and I'm a little sorry it's in revival. I think it really
Okay.
belongs in best play. I understand that probably the producers did not want to set up a challenge between it and Stereophonic, and so they maneuvered it. But it's basically almost a new play from 2013. It has not had that much of a regional life. It would have, to my mind, fit more appropriately in Best New Play. And it was by far the finest play I saw here.
Well, we have by far the finest theater critics joining us on the Dave's Gone By Tony special, our Broadway special. And among them, of course, Brian Scott Lipton. Remember that you can read his reviews at citytour.com, CITI TOUR.com. Any other places that we can find you or your work or
I am still doing interviews, and I'm very grateful to Theater Mania, where I was, as you know, editor-in-chief for over 8 years. So I'm continuously doing that. I occasionally contribute to theaterpizzazz.com. But yeah, City Tour is my main outlet for reviews, and anyone who wants to see what I really think about things, please go there. I am a first night critic. Things do go up on opening nights, and um, you can compare and contrast me with my colleagues if you so wish. One thing, as you probably know, Dave, is we don't, as theater critic colleagues, really talk to each other before our reviews come out. So I am just as anxious and surprised and upset and thrilled when I see what everybody else has to say.
and that's kind of what we do here on this annual program. Is you hear
Right.
one critic loves The Outsiders, another critic just hated it. We've already had that today.
Okay.
Whereas two people just went bonkers over Sarah Paulson inappropriate. So yeah, I mean,
Yeah, and I do think it's such a rich season, but it is the kind of season where you are going to get very varying degrees. And I know I need to go. One thing I want to say to everybody out there is when you do read any of us, or listen to any of us, I think you always have to be aware that we as critics, as objective as we try to be, and I think we all do, we do bring ourselves into the room. And so it is not altogether surprising sometimes that we disagree. We are lucky that we have a critical community of different genders, sexual orientations, ages, and all of that does influence in a way how we feel about things. No matter how you try to get it out of your head, you know, I know a show like Sus is so important to many of my female colleagues because it is such a great feminist anthem, if you want to call it that. It may not speak the same way to men. Lempicka, which closed and which I have no problem saying I didn't like, clearly spoke to queer women in a way it may not have spoken to the rest of us. I am not here to bash Stereophonic, which is very accomplished in its own way. But I think if you are of a certain generation, mine, and you are very familiar with what happened with Fleetwood Mac and the Making of Rumors, which is what this play is about, no matter what anybody would like to tell you, you're going to have a different reaction because it didn't feel as fresh to me as it would to so many of my colleagues that I spoke to who had no idea what the play was about, where I felt like I was almost watching a rehashed biography that I had already read. I mean, they were
the music, Fleetwood Mac, as reimagined in Stereophonic, right?
right, but it is really their story. I mean, down to very minute details. And so the first time I was really taken out of the play by knowing so much about it. I went back and saw it a second time. And again, I understand the craft more, but so just be aware that we all have our own little things that we bring to the table, and keep that in mind when you read us.
You got it. And thank you for bringing so much to the table with us here on Dave's Gone by. Brian Scott Lipton.
Thank you, David. I appreciate it.
Wonderful Tony night, wonderful season to come, and we'll
Yes,
see you.
enjoy tomorrow night.